Federal, provincial, and municipal governments have all put infrastructure spending at the top of their to-do lists. And according to the head of the Toronto Region Board of Trade, those plans to build roads and transit in Ontario will create nearly 150,000 construction-related jobs by the year 2031. Joining us now to examine whether the province's labour market can respond to this skills demand, we welcome back the President and CEO of the Toronto Region Board of Trade. There's Jan de Silva. Lovely to have you back here.
Thanks, Steve.
Give us a sense off the top, because not everybody in every region is able to follow what's going on. You got a lot of new stuff being built in terms of infrastructure in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area right now.
Absolutely.
Like what?
Like what? We've got a lot of transit. Metrolinx is electrifying our GO train system and expanding lines for us. City of Toronto has a huge transit network plan that they're trying to unfold. So there's a lot going on from an infrastructure perspective.
Roads and bridges also?
Roads and bridges, absolutely. There's talk of some expansion at the airport as well.
At Pearson Airport?
At Pearson, yes.
Maybe the building of a new airport?
No, we need some extension, maintenance of runways and some expansion of runways as well. There's a lot of capacity issues that are building up across the GTHA. Part of that is just we're beneficiaries of a lot of growth, population growth. Over the next 15 years, we're anticipating about 2 million more people to move in as new residents to the region. This all has to be planned for and accommodated.
It's astonishing.
Yeah.
I think everything you've mentioned is all sort of public sector oriented, right? Is the private sector building?
Well, absolutely. The private sector is building because with all this population growth, the demand for housing is increasing as well. So all of that needs to be accommodated.
What does this mean in terms, I mean, we're talking obviously billions upon billions of dollars of infrastructure development happening over the next couple of decades. What does it mean for jobs?
It means a tremendous amount of jobs. You started the show saying 150,000 jobs. That's absolutely right. We've got about 118,000 net new jobs and 29,000 jobs that need to be filled due to retirement over that period of time. And this is in the construction sector. This is both the trades as well as engineering, finance, and project management.
So make a bit of a list. What kinds of construction jobs are going to be needed over the next couple of decades?
Boy, it's basically all of the trades, electricians, plumbers, drywallers, those types of things.
Welders?
Welders as well, absolutely. We've got, as I said, the engineering side of things, as well as financial management for public-private partnership projects, the whole construction management, the on-site management, a whole range of jobs.
So here becomes the key question, because I do remember a former community college president talking about living in a province where we have jobs without people and people without jobs. So the question is, maybe 150,000 new jobs to build all of this infrastructure and deal with all of this. Do we have the people in this province who can do all of that work?
Today, we do not. We have youth and newcomers who are not employed who we'd like to stream into these careers. So that's why over the summer we spent time with the construction sector and some researchers and mapped out against the top 50 construction jobs what those jobs are and how you access them. The important thing about these jobs, they represent the bulk of those 147,000 jobs. All of them are paying double the minimum wage, and most of them, I'd say 80% of them, require some kind of post-secondary training and skills development. So they're higher order jobs for sure.
This I don't get then. If we know the jobs are going to be there, we know they're going to be there. So anybody who is in high school right now knows, you know, this is out there. Then why would these jobs go vacant?
Well, it's a good question, Steve. And here's the thing. We had a transportation summit a year ago in October. And the focus of the summit was, we've got the funding, now what? And the now what was the labor unions and the engineering firms saying, we don't have enough skilled people to work in to go into these jobs that are going to be created. And they were saying, we want to go in and talk to grade 9 students to educate them about where these jobs are. So on Take a Kid to Work Day, my son, who is in grade 9, we brought him in to read our talent study, and then he had to go in and present to our policy committee who wrote that report on his ideas as a grade 9 student, how you educate grade 9 students about these jobs. So other than developing a video game, he had a bunch of other great ideas, but a lot of it was about creating a platform like LinkedIn where students could learn about where those jobs are. We also know that parents as well may think that some of these jobs don't pay that well, where that's not the case. Well, we'll always need doctors and lawyers. The fact is that the trades pay extremely well, as do a lot of the engineering or professional services jobs. So a lot of it is about communication and education.
I don't know how much of it is, I'm not sure Johnny or Janie's going to make enough money if they do this job, and more about there's just something cooler about telling your friends that your kid's going to be a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or, you know, an engineer or whatever. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, and let me tell you, my sister has 2 boys, and let me talk to you about their journey in high school. Her one son decided he wanted to be an electrician. She got called in by his guidance counselor 3 times saying, your son is too smart to be an electrician. He should be an electrical engineer. To which her son said, but I tried an experience week with an electrical engineering firm and another with an electrician. I like to work with my hands. So she let him do the electrician path. But there is some bias in the system where you assume folks are too smart to go one way or the other. The other son decided...
But just hang on a sec. That's not a parent. That's a guidance counselor
that's right.
in a school giving bad guidance.
Well, it's interesting because the trades at this panel discussion that said we didn't have enough skills to fulfill all these jobs, they said since we dropped shop in high school, there's fewer kids going into the trades. Then those that are going into the trades, only about 40% are able to complete because our apprenticeship model is quite restricted in terms of the number of apprentices that can go through with the journeyman to get trained up. So there's a lot. Our report has 18, believe it or not, 18 different recommendations. 6 that are going against parents and the schools in terms of educating and informing them and the students. A whole series of recommendations around the post-secondary educational institutions. How do we scale up and make them aware of where the demand is going to be? And another set against the policymakers, which is looking at the apprenticeship ratios, looking at cross-border talent mobility. You know, Alberta is potentially coming back on stream now, but since 2014, about 40,000 jobs were lost in energy and the construction sector. Those were people that could have been moving into Ontario to take up some of these jobs, but there are some mobility borders around how we recognize their skills and certification.
Now, I interrupted you when you were in the midst of telling us about the second kid. What happened with that? With the other, this is your nephew, right?
A nephew decided to become a teacher, and we graduate 9,000 teachers a year in the province of Ontario.
For 5,000 jobs.
So he's teaching in the UK right now. So we're really hoping he falls in love with an Ontario girl and moves back. There we go.
But the truth is, I mean, that is as good an example as exists today of the mismatch between the kinds of graduates we're putting out in post-secondary, and there are not those jobs for those kinds of graduates. We got to turn that around somehow.
Well, we have to turn around, but it starts with us, and that's why it was so important that we as a Board of Trade worked with our members, because unless the employers are able to define where the demand is going to be, it's very difficult for people to access that information. So while we did this study against this infrastructure investment that the feds and the province and the cities and the municipalities in the region are making, we do want to lift this study against other sectors that are part of the Board of Trade so that over time, our ambition is to have a much more robust labor market outlook so that students can be better informed about where the opportunities are, and newcomers can also be informed about how they access these roles and how they get into the skills and certification they need to be.
Let me pick up on that. If we don't have here in the province homegrown talent to do all of that building that will be required over the next couple of decades, do we just go elsewhere in the world and import them all?
Well, we will. We will need immigration to support that. But that also, the true fullest extent benefit of all this infrastructure investment is if it's creating jobs and stimulating the economy here at home. So we really want to do everything we can to create those jobs and foster them locally.
Why should a parent try to convince his or her son and or daughter to go into construction?
Well, let me tell you.
Besides money. Okay, you're going to make a lot of money, but the nature of the work.
Well, then it depends on what that child is interested in. I mean, in the case of my nephew, he liked to work with his hands, be very, very hands-on. That's a generation of jobs we're talking about, the extent of jobs that are available in the trades side of things. And on the engineering side, it's much the same. And if you talk to our civil engineering firms, they've got projects working globally. So they could be picking up projects here in Toronto and at a certain point being moved out to other parts of the world to move on other interesting projects as well.
Whereas some people would see construction as, you know what, if you like to work with your hands, this is a great way to make a living, because you work with your hands, obviously. There is another set of perceptions which says it doesn't look like it's a very high-skilled job. It doesn't look like it's a job that requires a great deal of intellectual heft. And people obviously don't want to get pigeonholed into those kinds of stereotypes. So how do you avoid that?
Well, and I think this is where the education needs to come from. And I'm hopeful that as we activate a cabinet of trades and engineering firms to go out into the school system, we can start creating a better understanding of that. Because the trades themselves, most of them are community college and then going into an apprenticeship and then potentially post-secondary university, depending on what level of trades that they want to get into and what level of supervision or management they want to undertake. So it's not that you just leave high school and fall into this. There's a lot of work and experience that's required to be developed to go in.
And trades is not exactly like your parents' trades anymore, right? I mean, you've got to know robotics and you got to know.
No, it's
all
very,
sorts
very
of stuff now.
sophisticated. Absolutely, a lot of automation in there.
Is to the best that you know, is the post-secondary system in the province today geared up to meet the kind of demands that the labor market will have over the next decade and a half?
I believe if we can help connect the dots, it absolutely can be. And it's things like if the province is funding infrastructure, how do we get the province, if they're offering educational incentives, align those incentives to jobs that will be fulfilling this infrastructure development. So I think a lot of what this talent study was intended to do was connect the dots for all levels of government and for the community at large.
Put a ballpark salary on this. If you're in grade 9 today, which means that, 5, 6, 10 years from now, you may be starting to earn a living as a construction worker. How much money can you make?
Boy, the jobs that we're looking at in the study, you're looking at anywhere from $30 to $45 an hour. And the hours that you're working in construction can be extensive.
So you're talking a 6-figure salary.
Absolutely. This is good income, absolutely good income.
Are there other countries that are facing the same predicament we are right now and are maybe doing it better than we are?
I would say as it pertains to helping kids stream into education, Germany has some really good programs for apprenticeships where they're identifying early in high school which direction kids may want to go to. But other than that, I can tell you I've worked in other parts of the world where it's the same issue is happening. We've got kids graduating from post-secondary in a field of interest that they've studied, but there is no job attached to it at the end. So I think there is no global best practice, and perhaps that's what we can build here in Toronto.
Now, I'm going to give you another analogy here, and you tell me, what your advice is on this. 10 years ago, you might have told your kid, go into teaching college. Teaching is a great job. You're involved with children all the time. You have a chance to make an impact. You get summers off. You get a fantastic pension. You got a good salary, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of people would have done that, and then they would have found out that because of the way our demographics are working, there aren't the students to support a large number of teaching positions, and now there's a lot of unemployed teachers out there. In the same way, might we be making the same mistake about people to go into the skilled trades or the construction industry, in as much as we're going to have this huge building boom over the next 15 years, and then after that, it's going to fall off the edge of the table, and we're not going to build anything after that?
I don't think so. I mean, what we're building right now is just to accommodate the growth that we've had over the last 20 years. Over the coming 20 years, we've got tremendous growth happening in the region. And I would say that as the economy as a whole continues to expand in Canada, there'll be tremendous opportunities. But to have anything that's got a 15-year line of sight for demand, that's pretty amazing in this day and age with technology and disruption and everything else that's impacting so many other job classes.
That is true, right? I mean, you can basically say, if you go into any of these professions or trades that you mentioned earlier, you've basically got 15, 20 years solid, steady work ahead of you.
Yeah, and if I can put in context the total number, the big number was 147,000 jobs. Right now, there are 175,000 construction sector workers in Toronto region. So we're talking about almost, a demand curve is almost doubling that number over the next 10 to 15 years.
And what would the average age of them be? I bet it's up there.
Well, as I said, about 29,000 of them are approaching retirement age over that period of time, and it's the biggest bulk of retirement we've had in that sector in the past 30, 40 years. So.
Now, there's no guarantees in life, obviously, except for the fact that we can probably guarantee that there'll be another recession between now and the next 15 years when all of this infrastructure is to be built. And of course, we've seen this happen before, where, the Mike Harris government came in 20 years ago, saw that there was a subway being built across Eglinton and Toronto, decided to cancel it because they said we couldn't afford it. Is there a danger of some of these construction jobs disappearing because of a looming recession whenever it comes?
Okay, well, there's going to be cycles without a doubt, but the reality is because of our immigration focus as a country and the fact that Toronto region is attracting the highest percentage of immigrants, we've got population growth that will need to be supported. So you're going to have private sector as well as public sector development happening. So I would say the chances of the example you gave, Steve, happening are highly unlikely. Simply, we've just got so much growth we've got to accommodate in the region.
Gotcha. Can I ask you one other thing that has absolutely nothing to do with what we've been talking about, but I am dying to know what you think about this.
Okay.
Tolls on the Gardner and the QE and the Gardner Expressway and the Don Valley Parkway. Yes, no, maybe, what?
We're very supportive of this. 60% of the users of those two pieces of roadway live in the City of Toronto. The balance are from outside. But let me just say the tolls themselves have captured media attention, but it's one of about 8 different sources of revenue that the city is trying to develop in order to fund the transit that we really desperately need to get built in the city.
Does that mean if Mississauga City Council decides it wants to put tolls on one of its roadways, it ought to be allowed to?
Well, that's quite frankly up to them. I think the reality is if we look at the DVP and the Gardner, they're past their best before date. So there's billions of dollars needed to refurbish that. And you simply can't tax property owners enough to fulfill that. So I think the whole idea of a user pay system makes sense. You look at other global cities in North America and around the world, that's just how they do business. You need to have a source of funding to make that happen. I think the important thing with all of this, though, there's still too many parts of the City of Toronto where neighborhoods are not connected to public transit in order to access jobs. So it's really, really important from an inclusive development that we get that transit network built. City Council did a good job this summer proposing and approving a very fulsome transit network plan, and now it's about getting the funding in place to build it.
Gotcha. Thanks, Janet.
Thanks
That's Jan de Silva, Toronto Region Board of Trade.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.